December 16, 1944 began with an eerie silence that would soon shatter into history's most desperate gamble. Through the snow-laden forests of the Ardennes, nearly 300,000 German soldiers emerged from the morning fog, like ghosts returning from defeat, their Tiger tanks grinding forward in what Adolf Hitler christened Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, Operation Watch on the Rhine. The American troops manning this quiet sector had no idea they stood at the threshold of the largest battle the United States Army would ever fight. At precisely 5:30 that frozen morning, 2,000 German artillery pieces erupted simultaneously along an 85-mile front. The shells screamed through the darkness, transforming peaceful Belgian villages into infernos within minutes. Young American soldiers, many experiencing their first taste of combat, scrambled from their foxholes as the earth exploded around them. Hitler had staked everything on this offensive. His plan was audacious to the point of madness: smash through the thin American line, race to Antwerp, split the Allied armies, and force a negotiated peace before the inevitable happened. The German spearhead drove deep into American positions like a dagger. Entire regiments found themselves surrounded, cut off, annihilated. Within 48 hours, the Germans had created a massive bulge in the Allied lines, a bulge that would give this battle its name. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower, watching situation maps in his headquarters, faced a crisis unlike any since D-Day. The German panzers were advancing so rapidly that staff officers struggled to track their positions. But Hitler's plan contained a fatal flaw that even his most brilliant generals recognized: the road network. In the Ardennes, all major routes converged on a handful of critical crossroads towns. Without these junctions, the massive German armored columns would become hopelessly bottlenecked on narrow country lanes. The most vital of these crossroads bore an unremarkable name that would soon echo through military history: Bastogne. Eisenhower understood the mathematics of the situation with brutal clarity. He summoned Major General Maxwell Taylor's elite 101st Airborne Division from their rest areas in France. These were the same paratroopers who had dropped into Normandy on D-Day, men who had fought their way through Holland during Operation Market Garden. They were exhausted, understrength, and still recovering from months of continuous combat. But they were also the only mobile reserve available. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe received orders that would have made lesser men blanch: take the 101st to Bastogne, hold the crossroads at all costs. There was no time for proper planning or adequate supplies. The paratroopers loaded onto trucks and raced through the night, moving faster than anyone thought possible. They arrived in Bastogne on December 18th, just hours before German forces closed the ring. According to historian Stephen Ambrose's detailed account in Band of Brothers, what happened next defied conventional military wisdom. As German panzers swept past Bastogne on both sides, completing the encirclement, staff officers at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force assumed the 101st would attempt to break out. Instead, McAuliffe made a decision that seemed suicidal. His paratroopers would stay. They would let themselves be trapped. They would transform their encirclement into the Germans' worst nightmare: a fortified position directly athwart the enemy's main supply routes, forcing Hitler's armored divisions to divert precious resources to eliminate this thorn in their side, while the winter weather grounded Allied air support and the clock ticked toward inevitable German defeat. The trap snapped shut on December 21, 1944, when forward elements of the German 2nd Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr Division completed their encirclement of Bastogne. Inside the ring, 18,000 American soldiers prepared for what they knew would be either their finest hour or their tomb. The temperature plummeted to 10 degrees below freezing, and the paratroopers discovered they lacked winter clothing, adequate ammunition, medical supplies, and most critically, hope of reinforcement. German commanders initially viewed Bastogne as a minor inconvenience. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored warfare, had always preached speed above all else. Bypass strong points, drive for the objectives, let infantry mop up later. But Hitler's plan required the roads through Bastogne, and those roads remained firmly in American hands. What began as a minor tactical problem metastasized into a strategic disaster. The German 5th Panzer Army commander, General Hasso von Manteuffel, found himself in an impossible position. He needed Bastogne's road network to supply his advancing spearheads, but reducing the American position would require diverting entire divisions from the main effort. Von Manteuffel made the decision to contain Bastogne while simultaneously trying to take it, a compromise that satisfied no one and would ultimately doom the offensive. Inside Bastogne's shrinking perimeter, McAuliffe organized his defense with the cold efficiency that had made the 101st legendary. He divided the town into sectors, assigned each regiment its defensive zone, and established his command post in the Heinz barracks. The paratroopers dug in, transformed every building into a fortress, and prepared to make the Germans pay for every yard. The first major German assault came on December 19th. Elements of the 2nd Panzer Division struck from the northeast, confident they could brush aside what they assumed were demoralized American stragglers. They encountered instead the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, veterans who had learned their deadly trade under fire from Normandy to Holland. The Americans let the German infantry advance to within 50 yards before opening fire. The slaughter was immediate and comprehensive. Colonel Robert Sink's 506th held their sector against repeated German attacks, but the ammunition situation grew critical. Artillery crews rationed shells to 10 per gun per day. Rifle companies shared ammunition between foxholes. The medical staff operated in cellars by candlelight, performing surgery without adequate anesthesia. Yet the line held. On December 22nd, German officers approached American positions under a white flag. They carried an ultimatum typed on captured American paper: surrender or face annihilation. The German commander promised honorable treatment as prisoners of war and warned that continued resistance would result in the total destruction of Bastogne and everyone in it. The ultimatum reached McAuliffe while he ate breakfast in his command post. He read it, crumpled the paper, and uttered a single word that would become the most famous reply in American military history: nuts. His staff officers convinced him this response might confuse the Germans, so the official written reply elaborated: to the German commander, nuts, the American commander. When the puzzled German officers asked for clarification, Colonel Joseph Harper explained in language they understood: it means go to hell. The German response was predictable. Artillery fire intensified. Luftwaffe bombers, flying their first sorties in weeks, struck the town. German ground attacks increased in frequency and ferocity, but McAuliffe had counted on this reaction. Every German shell fired at Bastogne was a shell not fired at American forces elsewhere. Every German division tied down trying to reduce his perimeter was a division not advancing toward Antwerp. The trap was working exactly as intended. The Americans were not the ones caught. By December 23rd, the weather finally cleared. The roar of aircraft engines brought the paratroopers stumbling from their foxholes, scanning the sky with desperate hope. Wave after wave of C-47 transport planes appeared, flying so low the men could see the pilots. Parachutes blossomed across the winter sky, red, yellow, blue, green, carrying ammunition, medical supplies, food, and most precious of all, artillery shells. The resupply transformed the tactical situation overnight. American guns, silent for days, roared back to life. December 23, 1944 marked the turning point when the besieged became the besiegers. As C-47 transport planes continued their desperate resupply runs into Bastogne, General George Patton's Third Army launched a counteroffensive from the south that would become legend. Patton had accomplished what military experts considered impossible. He had wheeled his entire army 90 degrees north in the middle of winter and was now driving toward the encircled paratroopers with a fury that matched his legendary temper. The German forces surrounding Bastogne suddenly found themselves caught between hammer and anvil. Von Manteuffel's worst nightmare was materializing. He had committed significant forces to reducing Bastogne, and now those forces faced annihilation. The German commander pleaded with Hitler for permission to withdraw, to shorten his lines, to salvage what remained of the offensive. Hitler's response was characteristically uncompromising: take Bastogne, hold the line, victory or death. German attacks intensified to suicidal levels. The Panzer Lehr Division, one of Germany's elite formations, threw itself against the American perimeter in a series of desperate assaults. On Christmas Eve, German armor penetrated the lines held by the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. For 6 terrible hours, the outcome hung in balance as American paratroopers fought Panzers in close combat through Bastogne's streets. Technical Sergeant Isidore Jackman exemplified the courage that held the line. When German tanks broke through near the village of Braz, Jackman grabbed a bazooka and charged alone across open ground swept by machine gun fire. He destroyed 2 tanks before German fire cut him down. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously, one of 17 awarded for actions during the Bastogne siege. Christmas Day, 1944 brought no peace to Bastogne. German artillery maintained its relentless bombardment. Luftwaffe fighters strafed American positions, but inside their foxholes, the paratroopers celebrated with unexpected gifts. Each man received 2 pancakes, some coffee, and for many their first hot meal in a week. McAuliffe's Christmas message circulated through the positions. "What's merry about all this, you ask? We're giving our country and our loved ones at home a worthy Christmas present, and being privileged to take part in this gallant feat of arms, are truly making for ourselves a Merry Christmas." The Germans launched their most powerful assault yet on December 25th. Elements of 5 divisions, the 1st SS Panzer Division, the 9th Panzer Division, the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, Panzer Lehr, and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, converged on Bastogne from multiple directions. The plan was to overwhelm the Americans through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. Hitler had committed resources to Bastogne that might have broken through elsewhere, but the crossroads town had become a psychological objective he could not abandon. The American line bent, but never broke. At the village of Champs, Company 1 of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment faced a full-strength panzer attack. With their backs literally against a wall, they had no room to retreat. The paratroopers held their ground. Private First Class Kurt Gable described the scene in his memoir. "The panzers came on like prehistoric monsters, their guns swiveling toward our positions. We hit them with everything: bazookas, rifle grenades, even Molotov cocktails made from captured German gasoline. 3 tanks burned. The rest retreated." According to military historian John McManus's comprehensive work, Alamo in the Ardennes, the German failure at Bastogne represented more than a tactical defeat. It marked the psychological breaking point of the Wehrmacht in the West. The Germans had thrown everything at 18,000 surrounded Americans and had been repulsed. The myth of German invincibility, already crumbling since Normandy, shattered completely in the frozen forests around Bastogne. As Christmas ended, Patton's spearhead drew closer. The 4th Armored Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, smashed through German defensive positions with methodical violence. Every mile cost blood. German defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew defeat meant the war's end. But American determination proved inexorable. The link-up was no longer a question of if, but when. December 26, 1944 dawned with artillery thunder rolling across the frozen landscape like an approaching storm. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams's 4th Armored Division had fought to within 4 miles of Bastogne's perimeter, but those final miles proved the bloodiest. Every farmhouse concealed German anti-tank guns. Every tree line hid machine gun nests. The Germans understood that if Patton's forces reached Bastogne, the entire Ardennes offensive would collapse into chaotic retreat. The race to relieve Bastogne had consumed Patton completely. His Third Army had accomplished the impossible, moving more than 100,000 men and their equipment 90 degrees across icy roads in less than 48 hours. But now, with victory tantalizingly close, the advance had bogged down in a killing match against German defenders who sold their lives expensively. Patton raged at his commanders, demanding they push harder, move faster, break through at any cost. Inside Bastogne, the paratroopers had no knowledge of how close relief stood. German artillery fire had intensified, if such a thing remained possible. The Luftwaffe made its final major effort, sending waves of Focke-Wulf fighters to strafe and bomb the American positions. But the weather that had finally cleared also brought swarms of Allied fighter bombers, thunderbolts and lightnings that turned the skies above the Ardennes into a graveyard for German aircraft. The German divisions surrounding Bastogne were disintegrating. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had advanced furthest toward the Meuse River, found itself cut off and running out of fuel. The 9th Panzer Division had been bled white trying to storm Bastogne's defenses. Panzer Lehr, once Germany's premier armored formation, existed more in name than reality. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division had suffered 60% casualties. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division had been reduced to regimental strength. Von Manteuffel made one final attempt to take Bastogne before relief arrived. On the afternoon of December 26th, he committed his last reserves, elements of the 9th SS Panzer Division, in a desperate assault against the southern perimeter where Patton's forces would likely break through. The logic was sound. If the Germans could penetrate there, they would drive a wedge between the relieving forces and the besieged garrison. The attack struck Company C of the 37th Tank Battalion with overwhelming force. German King Tigers and Panthers, the most powerful tanks in the world, advanced behind a curtain of artillery fire. American Shermans, outgunned and out-armored, fought from prepared positions with every advantage terrain could provide. The battle devolved into a point-blank slugging match, where victory went to the side that could sustain losses longest. Staff Sergeant Robert Watson Sherman took 3 hits that failed to penetrate before his gunner landed a killing shot on a Panther at 75 yards. Watson's tank was hit a 4th time, this time fatally. The crew bailed out under machine gun fire. Watson made it to friendly lines. 2 of his crew did not. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as American tank destroyers, dug in and camouflaged, dueled with German armor at ranges where skill mattered more than technical superiority. At precisely 4:45 in the afternoon, forward elements of the 37th Tank Battalion made contact with paratroopers from the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion south of Bastogne. Lieutenant Charles Bogus's lead tank rolled into the town of Assenois, crashed through German positions, and linked up with astonished paratroopers who had begun to wonder if relief would ever arrive. Bogus reportedly asked the first paratrooper he encountered, "How are you, soldier?" The reply captured everything. "Gee, I'm mighty glad to see you." The siege of Bastogne had ended, but the battle for Bastogne had not. Hitler refused to accept that his offensive had failed. He demanded counterattacks to re-establish the encirclement, to cut off Patton's corridor, to retrieve victory from the jaws of defeat. German forces that should have been withdrawing to defensible positions instead launched suicidal attacks against the expanding American salient. The price of these futile German attacks was catastrophic. During the week following the relief of Bastogne, American forces systematically destroyed the German divisions that had surrounded the town. The 2nd Panzer Division ceased to exist as a fighting force. Its remnants surrendered or fled on foot when their fuel ran out. The 9th Panzer Division lost 70% of its armor. Panzer Lehr Division required complete rebuilding. The 15th Panzer Grenadier and 26th Volksgrenadier Divisions were shattered beyond immediate reconstitution. January 1, 1945 arrived with Hitler launching Operation Nordwind, North Wind, a desperate attempt to salvage something from the Ardennes disaster. But the German army that attacked in Alsace was a shadow of the force that had erupted from the fog 17 days earlier. The fighting around Bastogne had consumed Germany's strategic reserve, destroyed irreplaceable veteran formations, and exhausted fuel supplies that could never be replaced. The Americans, bloodied but unbroken, had learned they could stand against Germany's best and prevail. The full accounting of German losses around Bastogne revealed the magnitude of Hitler's miscalculation. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had nearly reached the Meuse River, lost all of its tanks, half its trucks, and most of its artillery. When survivors finally straggled back to German lines, the division numbered fewer than 3,000 men from an original strength of 15,000. The unit required months to rebuild and never regained its combat effectiveness. The 9th Panzer Division's destruction proved even more complete. This elite formation, veteran of campaigns from Poland to Russia, had been ground to pieces against Bastogne's defenses. American after-action reports documented destroying or capturing 82 German tanks, 37 assault guns, and hundreds of other vehicles bearing the division's distinctive insignia. The survivors retreated without heavy weapons, reduced to light infantry with no organic armor support. Panzer Lehr's fate encapsulated the entire German debacle. This division, originally formed from demonstration units and considered Germany's premier armored formation, had already been decimated in Normandy and hastily rebuilt. The Ardennes offensive consumed what remained. By January 1945, Panzer Lehr existed only on paper. Its commander, General Fritz Bayerlein, surrendered what remained of his command in April, with fewer than 2,000 men, a division in name only. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division's casualties exceeded 70% during the fighting around Bastogne. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division, which had surrounded the town and launched the first attacks, was pulled from the line in mid-January with fewer than 4,000 combat-effective soldiers remaining. Both divisions required complete reconstitution and played negligible roles in the war's final months. American intelligence estimates, compiled in the months following the battle, concluded that 5 German divisions had been destroyed or rendered combat ineffective during the Bastogne fighting. According to Hugh Cole's official U.S. Army history, the Ardennes, Battle of the Bulge. German forces committed to the Bastogne sector suffered approximately 37,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or captured, representing nearly half the total German losses during the entire Ardennes offensive. The arithmetic of destruction extended beyond personnel. The fields and forests around Bastogne became graveyards for German armor. American salvage teams counted over 400 destroyed or abandoned German tanks and assault guns in the immediate vicinity. This represented roughly 20% of all German armor committed to the offensive. The panzers that survived limped back to Germany with worn-out engines, damaged transmissions, and empty fuel tanks. Hitler's insistence on continuing attacks after the Americans relieved Bastogne compounded the disaster. From December 27 through early January, German forces launched a series of increasingly desperate counterattacks aimed at re-establishing the encirclement. Each attack failed with devastating losses. American fighter bombers, operating in clear weather, turned the Ardennes roads into killing grounds. Pilots reported target-rich environments, columns of German vehicles backed up for miles, unable to advance or retreat, burning under rocket and machine gun fire. The strategic implications of Bastogne resonated far beyond casualty figures. Hitler had gambled Germany's last mobile reserves on the Ardennes offensive, hoping to split the Western Allies and force a negotiated peace. The gamble failed catastrophically. The Wehrmacht divisions destroyed at Bastogne would be desperately needed 3 months later, when Soviet forces crossed the Oder River and drove toward Berlin. Moreover, the fighting demonstrated conclusively that German tactical and operational excellence could no longer compensate for overwhelming Allied material superiority. The German soldiers who attacked Bastogne were veterans, well-led, and initially well-supplied. They fought with skill and determination, but they faced American forces backed by unlimited ammunition, complete air superiority, and a logistical system that could sustain intensive combat indefinitely. The outcome was never truly in doubt, only its cost. McAuliffe's paratroopers had held for 7 days against forces that outnumbered them 3-1. They had absorbed everything the Wehrmacht could throw at them and emerged victorious. But victory came at a terrible price. The 101st Airborne Division suffered over 2,000 casualties during the siege. Some companies had been reduced to platoon strength. The psychological toll was incalculable. Veterans would carry memories of those frozen days for the rest of their lives. January 8, 1945, marked the official end of major German offensive operations in the Ardennes, though fighting would continue for another month as Allied forces methodically reduced the bulge. The Battle of Bastogne had evolved from a desperate defensive stand into a sustained counteroffensive that would push German forces back to their starting positions and beyond. The American victory was complete, but the path to that victory was paved with frozen bodies and shattered equipment on both sides. The tactical genius of the Bastogne defense lay not in holding ground, though that achievement was remarkable, but in transforming encirclement into advantage. Classical military doctrine taught that surrounded forces should break out or face destruction. McAuliffe's decision to remain, to fight from within the German ring, violated conventional wisdom, yet this violation proved devastatingly effective. By occupying Bastogne, the paratroopers denied Germans the road network essential for sustaining their advance. German armored spearheads racing toward the Meuse River found their supply lines stretched beyond breaking point. Fuel trucks that should have reached forward units instead sat immobilized, unable to navigate congested secondary roads. Ammunition convoys backed up for miles. The entire German offensive lost momentum, not because American forces stopped the advance directly, but because logistics, the unglamorous mathematics of warfare, rendered further movement impossible. German commanders recognized this reality too late. Von Manteuffel later wrote in his memoirs that the decision to commit substantial forces against Bastogne was Hitler's greatest single error during the Ardennes offensive. Those divisions, thrown piecemeal into attacks against prepared American positions, could have exploited gaps elsewhere or formed a mobile reserve to counter Allied counterattacks. Instead, they were consumed in futile attempts to eliminate a garrison that grew stronger with each passing day. The human cost of this strategic miscalculation was staggering. American casualty figures for the entire Ardennes offensive exceeded 19,000 killed, 47,000 wounded, and 23,000 captured or missing. German losses approached 100,000 casualties, with approximately 800 tanks destroyed. These were losses Germany, with its shrinking manpower pool and crippled industry, could not replace. The Americans could and did. The Bastogne garrison itself suffered disproportionately. Of the 18,000 soldiers who entered the encirclement, over 2,000 became casualties. The 101st Airborne Division's infantry regiments were particularly devastated. The 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment lost 40% of its strength. The 502nd and 506th Parachute Infantry Regiments suffered similar losses. Company commanders found themselves leading platoon-sized units. Platoon sergeants commanded squads. Yet the paratroopers' morale never wavered. This psychological resilience mystified German commanders who interrogated captured Americans. How could surrounded soldiers, outgunned and outnumbered, maintain fighting spirit? The answer lay partly in American confidence that relief would arrive, a confidence McAuliffe's leadership fostered, and partly in the paratroopers' elite status. These were men who had volunteered for hazardous duty, who had trained extensively, who considered themselves the best soldiers in the American army. Surrender was incompatible with their self-image. German morale, by contrast, collapsed progressively as the offensive stalled. Soldiers who had attacked on December 16th believing they would reach Antwerp within a week found themselves fighting house to house in a Belgian crossroads town 2 weeks later. The promised fuel supplies never arrived. The Luftwaffe's air support proved intermittent and ineffective against American fighter bombers. Veteran soldiers recognized the pattern. They had seen it in Russia, in Normandy, in Italy. Germany was losing the war, and no amount of courage or tactical skill could change that fundamental reality. The destruction of 5 Panzer divisions at Bastogne accelerated this collapse. German armored formations were the Wehrmacht's elite, better equipped, better trained, and until the Ardennes, better led than their American counterparts. When these elite forces failed to overcome surrounded paratroopers, the psychological impact rippled throughout the German military. If Panzer divisions could not defeat Americans, who could? Allied intelligence officers studying captured documents and interrogating prisoners pieced together the full scope of Germany's defeat. The 2nd Panzer Division's war diary, recovered in March 1945, detailed the unit's dissolution. Daily entries tracked the relentless attrition, tanks destroyed by American bazookas, supply trucks abandoned for lack of fuel, infantry companies reduced to skeleton strength. The final entry, dated January 7th, recorded the division's withdrawal with less than battalion strength remaining. The 9th Panzer Division's experience paralleled the 2nd Panzer's tragedy. Unit records documented a formation that entered the Ardennes with 148 tanks and assault guns. By mid-January, fewer than 20 remained operational. The division's commander, General Harold von Elverfeldt, was killed by American artillery on January 24th while attempting to organize a defensive line. His death symbolized the Wehrmacht's deteriorating leadership situation. Experienced commanders were being killed or captured faster than they could be replaced. Panzerlehr's fate was recorded in unusual detail because its commander, General Bayerlein, survived the war and wrote extensively about his experiences. Bayerlein described watching his division destroyed piecemeal around Bastogne, throwing understrength battle groups against American positions in attacks he knew were futile, but orders demanded. By war's end, Panzer Lehr had been rebuilt and destroyed 3 times. The formation that surrendered in the Ruhr pocket bore no resemblance to the elite unit that had trained Germany's panzer leaders before the war. February 1945 found the Ardennes bulge completely eliminated, and Allied forces once again positioned along Germany's western frontier. The German army that retreated across the Rhine bore little resemblance to the confident force that had attacked 2 months earlier. The Ardennes offensive, and particularly the fighting around Bastogne, had broken the Wehrmacht's back. Germany would fight on for 3 more months, but defeat was now inevitable, and merely a matter of time. The strategic consequences of Bastogne extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Hitler's decision to commit his strategic reserve to the Ardennes meant those forces were unavailable when Soviet armies launched their massive winter offensive in Poland on January 12. The Red Army advanced nearly 400 miles in 3 weeks, reaching the Oder River by February, barely 40 miles from Berlin. German generals pleaded for reinforcements. Hitler had none to send. The divisions that might have contested the Soviet advance lay destroyed in Belgium's frozen forests. American military doctrine was fundamentally altered by the Bastogne experience. The battle demonstrated that well-led, adequately supplied forces could hold against superior numbers if they occupied defensible terrain and received air support. The paratroopers' stand validated emerging theories about mobile defense, the idea that containing enemy penetrations and counterattacking from multiple directions was more effective than trying to hold every inch of ground. The U.S. Army's tank destroyer doctrine, which had performed disappointingly in earlier campaigns, proved its worth at Bastogne. Tank destroyers firing from prepared positions destroyed German armor at rates the more heavily armored Shermans could not match. This lesson influenced post-war tank design, leading to American emphasis on gunpowder and tactical mobility over heavy armor. German military performance at Bastogne revealed the Wehrmacht's deteriorating condition. The 5 panzer divisions committed to the Bastogne fighting should have overwhelmed the American garrison through combined arms coordination, massing armor, infantry, and artillery in synchronized attacks. Instead, German attacks were piecemeal, poorly coordinated, and often counterproductive. Radio intercepts revealed confused command relationships, units operating with outdated intelligence, and commanders unable to respond effectively to changing circumstances. Part of this dysfunction stemmed from Hitler's micromanagement. The German dictator insisted on approving major tactical decisions, creating delays that allowed Americans to reinforce threatened sectors. When German commanders requested permission to withdraw or reposition forces, Hitler's headquarters took hours or days to respond. By the time approval arrived, the tactical situation had changed, and the original plan was obsolete. The Luftwaffe's failure at Bastogne proved equally catastrophic. German air power, which had dominated European skies earlier in the war, could barely contest American air superiority by late 1944. The Luftwaffe committed nearly 3,000 aircraft to support the Ardennes offensive, but losses were unsustainable. American fighter bombers destroyed German aircraft on the ground, intercepted bombing raids, and hunted German fighters throughout the battle zone. By January, the Luftwaffe had lost over 700 aircraft, losses that could not be replaced given Germany's fuel shortages and decimated pilot training program. American air power transformed the Bastogne battle once weather cleared on December 23. Fighter bombers from the 9th Air Force flew over 11,000 sorties during the siege, dropping bombs and firing rockets at German positions, supply columns, and reinforcements. Pilots reported conditions resembling a shooting gallery, targets everywhere, minimal enemy fighter opposition, and grateful ground troops marking targets with colored smoke. The psychological impact on German soldiers was devastating. Veterans who had survived the Eastern Front reported that American air attacks at Bastogne exceeded anything they had experienced in Russia. The airlift that sustained Bastogne's garrison was itself a remarkable achievement. From December 23 through December 26, C-47 transports flew over 900 sorties into Bastogne, delivering nearly 1,000 tons of supplies. Pilots navigated through German anti-aircraft fire, winter storms, and fighter attacks to drop supplies with remarkable accuracy. The airlift demonstrated that modern warfare had evolved beyond traditional siege tactics. Defenders with air superiority could be sustained indefinitely regardless of ground encirclement. Medical personnel performed miracles keeping wounded soldiers alive under impossible conditions. Surgeons operated in cellars lit by candles and flashlights, using improvised instruments and diminishing supplies of anesthesia and antibiotics. The wounded were evacuated by air once weather permitted, loaded onto the same C-47s that had delivered supplies. Survival rates for wounded evacuated from Bastogne exceeded 80%, a testament to both medical skill and the evacuation system's efficiency. The Battle of Bastogne produced numerous individual acts of heroism. 17 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions during the siege, the highest concentration for any single battle in the European theater. Hundreds of distinguished service crosses, silver stars, and bronze stars recognized extraordinary courage under fire. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from the Germans themselves. Captured German officers consistently expressed shocked admiration for the American defenders. One Panzer commander, interviewed after the war, stated flatly, "We never imagined Americans could fight like that." The echoes of Bastogne resonated through the final months of World War II in Europe and continued influencing military thinking for generations afterward. When German forces surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, military historians immediately began analyzing how the Allies had achieved victory. The Battle of Bastogne emerged as a pivotal moment, the point where German offensive capability was irretrievably broken, and the war's outcome became mathematically certain. Post-war analysis confirmed what participants had suspected. Bastogne was Hitler's greatest strategic blunder. The German offensive had consumed 120,000 casualties, 800 tanks, and Germany's entire fuel reserve. These losses were unsustainable. More critically, the offensive depleted Germany's strategic reserves at precisely the moment when Soviet armies were preparing their final push toward Berlin. Had Hitler kept those 5 Panzer divisions in reserve, they might have contested the Soviet advance across Poland and into Germany, possibly extending the war by months. The American defenders of Bastogne became legendary figures in military history. The 101st Airborne Division received a Presidential Unit Citation, the highest unit award possible. General McAuliffe was promoted, and his "nuts" reply entered American popular culture as the perfect expression of defiant courage. Individual paratroopers who had fought at Bastogne found themselves celebrated as exemplars of American fighting spirit. But the human cost of that fighting spirit was immense and lasting. Veterans of Bastogne struggled with what would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder. Many carried physical wounds, amputations from frostbite, injuries from shrapnel, permanent disabilities from German fire. The psychological wounds were equally severe. Survivors described recurring nightmares of artillery bombardment, of German tanks grinding toward their positions, of friends dying in frozen foxholes. Some never fully recovered from those 7 days of encirclement. The German soldiers who survived Bastogne faced an even bleaker future. Those captured became prisoners of war, though conditions in American POW camps were far superior to what German prisoners experienced in Soviet captivity. German veterans who evaded capture found themselves fighting a losing war for 4 more months before inevitable defeat. The lucky ones surrendered to Western allies. The unlucky were captured by Soviet forces and disappeared into the Gulag for years. The 5 destroyed Panzer divisions at Bastogne represented the core of Germany's remaining armored capability. The 2nd Panzer Division was never rebuilt to combat effectiveness. The 9th Panzer Division was reconstituted with training units and second-line troops but bore no resemblance to the veteran formation destroyed in Belgium. Panzer Lehr was rebuilt twice more and destroyed twice more before war's end. The 15th Panzer Grenadier and 26th Volksgrenadier Divisions existed only on paper after January 1945. Their surviving troops were scattered among other units. Modern military academies study Bastogne as a case study in defensive operations, logistics under fire, and the importance of holding key terrain. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College requires all students to analyze the battle, focusing on McAuliffe's decision-making, the effectiveness of combined arms defense, and the role of air power in modern warfare. West Point uses Bastogne to teach leadership under extreme stress, how to maintain unit cohesion when surrounded, outgunned, and faced with overwhelming odds. The town of Bastogne itself became a pilgrimage site for military historians and veterans. The Bastogne Memorial, built in the shape of an American five-pointed star, honors the 18,000 defenders who held the crossroads. Museums throughout the town preserve artifacts from the battle, German and American weapons, uniforms, personal items, and photographs that document those desperate December days. Each year on December 16th, the anniversary of the German attack, ceremonies commemorate the battle and honor the soldiers who fought there. The tactical lessons of Bastogne influenced Cold War military planning. NATO doctrine for defending Western Europe incorporated principles learned during the siege, the importance of holding key transportation nodes, the necessity of maintaining air superiority, and the effectiveness of combined arms defense against numerically superior forces. American commanders planning defensive positions in Germany during the Cold War studied Bastogne's terrain, defensive arrangements, and supply requirements as templates for resisting potential Soviet attacks. The destruction of 5 German Panzer divisions at Bastogne also provided crucial intelligence about Wehrmacht capabilities and vulnerabilities. American analysts studying captured equipment and documents discovered that German armor, while technologically impressive, suffered from mechanical unreliability and excessive fuel consumption. Tiger and Panther tanks broke down frequently and required extensive maintenance, a critical vulnerability when operating far from repair facilities. This intelligence influenced American tank development, leading to designs that prioritized reliability and ease of maintenance over raw combat power. The airlift that sustained Bastogne's garrison established precedents for future operations. The Berlin airlift of 1948 through 1949, which sustained West Berlin against Soviet blockade, drew directly on lessons learned at Bastogne. Air Force planners understood that modern transport aircraft could sustain entire cities if given air superiority and adequate resources. This capability became a cornerstone of American Cold War strategy, the ability to project power and sustain forces anywhere on Earth. The psychological dimensions of Bastogne proved equally influential. The battle demonstrated that elite units with strong leadership could maintain fighting effectiveness even when surrounded and outnumbered. This insight influenced the development of special forces, ranger battalions, and other elite formations designed to operate behind enemy lines or in isolation from friendly forces. The paratroopers' performance at Bastogne became the standard against which such units measured themselves. German military professionals studying the battle drew different lessons. Post-war memoirs by surviving Wehrmacht officers consistently identified Bastogne as a turning point where tactical excellence could no longer compensate for strategic bankruptcy. German commanders had fought brilliantly at tactical and operational levels. Their use of terrain, combined arms coordination, and aggressive offensive spirit remained impressive. But brilliant tactics in service of flawed strategy merely accelerated defeat. Hitler's decision to attack in the Ardennes, and particularly his obsession with capturing Bastogne, doomed Germany to catastrophic losses it could not afford. The broader strategic context reveals why Bastogne mattered so profoundly. By December 1944, Germany was fighting a two-front war against enemies with overwhelming material superiority. The Soviet Union was mobilizing millions of soldiers, producing tanks and artillery by the thousands, and advancing relentlessly from the east. The Western Allies controlled the seas, dominated the air, and possessed industrial capacity that dwarfed Germany's diminished production. Germany's only hope, a faint hope at best, was to inflict such devastating losses on one front that the opposing alliance would fracture. The Ardennes offensive represented Hitler's attempt to realize this hope. If German forces could reach Antwerp, they would cut off British and Canadian armies in Holland, isolate American forces in Belgium, and potentially force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. This strategy required speed above all else, a lightning thrust to the coast before Allied forces could react. Bastogne was not supposed to matter. German armor was supposed to bypass the town, leaving it for follow-on infantry to reduce. But McAuliffe and his paratroopers made Bastogne matter. By holding the crossroads, they forced Germans to divert resources, lose momentum, and ultimately fail in their strategic objective. The Americans transformed a tactical position into a strategic asset through sheer determination and fighting skill. This transformation, from besieged garrison to fulcrum of victory, represents Bastogne's most important lesson. The final accounting of Bastogne's significance extends beyond casualty figures and destroyed equipment. The battle represented a moral victory that resonated throughout the Allied coalition. After months of grinding advances through France and Belgium, after the disappointment of Operation Market Garden's failure, after predictions that Germany would collapse by Christmas proved overly optimistic, the American defense of Bastogne demonstrated that Allied forces could withstand Germany's best punch and counterpunch devastatingly. For the American soldiers who fought there, Bastogne became the defining experience of their lives. Veterans of the siege formed associations that met annually for decades after the war, maintaining bonds forged in frozen foxholes under German artillery fire. Their stories, told and retold, became part of American military culture. Tales of ordinary men performing extraordinary acts under impossible conditions. These stories inspired subsequent generations of soldiers facing their own desperate circumstances in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The town of Bastogne itself was rebuilt in the years following liberation, though scars from the battle remained visible for decades. Buildings pockmarked by machine gun fire, cellars where wounded were treated, foxholes where paratroopers sheltered from artillery. These physical remnants served as tangible connections to December 1944. Modern visitors walking Bastogne's streets follow paths once contested yard by yard, where young men from Kansas and Kentucky, Texas and Tennessee held against Panzers from the Ruhr and Bavaria. In the end, Bastogne stands as testament to a fundamental truth of warfare. Battles are won not only by weapons and numbers, but by human will. The Americans let themselves be trapped because they understood that their encirclement was Germany's catastrophe, not theirs. They held because retreat was unthinkable. They prevailed because they refused to accept any other outcome. The 5 German Panzer divisions destroyed at Bastogne were not defeated by superior equipment or overwhelming numbers. They were destroyed by 18,000 soldiers who simply would not quit. This refusal to quit, this stubborn determination to hold against all odds, transformed a small Belgian crossroads town into one of history's decisive battlefields. When historians assess turning points in World War II's European theater, D-Day, the Falaise Pocket, the Rhine crossing, Bastogne stands alongside these moments as a battle where the war's trajectory was fundamentally altered. The paratroopers who fought there understood they were making history. They could not have known they were also making legend.